Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and this second episode of the week. Happy to be back with you. Hope that your week went well. Hope you maybe have something interesting, fun, or whatever adjective you want to put on it that makes your weekend great coming up over the next couple of days. It's been, a kind of a normal week. We've had a few appointments here and there. It was my sister-in-law's birthday. Happy birthday, sister-in-law. And I did feel so bad. I spoke with Cindy for this interview. I am interviewing author Cindy Callaghan, as you can see from the title of this episode, on Monday this week. And we'd had to reschedule because I'd had internet issues over the weekend. And so she was very sweet about rescheduling so we could get those sorted out. And then on Monday, I had a migraine, and it was it wasn't the worst one I've ever had, but it was to the point where I felt like my brain was scrambled. And so I just felt like I was babbling throughout the entire interview. So I'm going to apologize to Cindy and to you if I do sound like my brain has been whisked around with an egg beater during this interview. But Cindy's great, and I enjoyed talking to her. The book is so much fun. It is a middle grade book. It is called My Big Heart-Shaped Fail. Let me give you the description of the book. In this hourly, time-stamped, action-packed tween comedy of errors, Abby Gray, feeling weighed down by her secrets and lies, lets 5 balloons float into the sky with her deepest secrets attached to them in a desperate attempt to clear her conscience. Her relief is short-lived, though. The next day, those balloons start dropping one by one at her school, revealing Abby's innermost thoughts to both friends and frenemies and creating hilarious misinterpretations of crushes against her peers. This is the worst day of her life. Or is it? Before the last bell rings, Abby manages to integrate the oddball who is blackmailing her into her friend group and to fix the mix-ups the notes have caused. Not only getting couples back together, but also making a few new love matches, and finally comes clean as the author of the notes that have created such chaos. And so again, that is the description of My Big Heart-Shaped Fail. Abby is in 8th grade, and on the one hand, this book was, it's so much fun. Not on the one hand, it is so much fun. It made me laugh. Some of the characters are just hilarious, and of course it's one of those, it's comedy of errors, just as that first sentence says, and everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and sometimes it goes wrong in the silliest and craziest of ways. It did not make me want to go back to the 8th grade. It reminded me of some memories, both good and bad, of my time in junior high. But what I loved about the book is how, even though there are those issues that we probably all remember from 7th and 8th grades and that age group, Cindy brings characters together and really creates an atmosphere where Abby and some of the other characters come to some understandings and new friendships are made, and it doesn't feel forced. Sometimes you read books of this age group and you feel like, yeah, but how likely is that to happen? And I think that the way Cindy writes Abby's character just makes her this very kind, very caring person who comes to learn some things about herself and her friends in this book. And so Cindy does a really nice job of crafting that story and creating the character arcs so that some relationships can grow and change throughout the story. So I really enjoyed that. But let's go ahead now and turn to the interview with Cindy so she can tell you more about this book and some of the other books that she's written. Again, the book is called My Big Heart-Shaped Fail, and the author is Cindy Callaghan. Hi, Cindy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk about your middle grade book, My Big Heart-Shaped Fail. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit.
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm a middle grade author. I have, My Big Heart-Shaped Fail is my 11th published book. I'm also a mom of 3 fabulous kids, a pet lover, and little fun fact that authorship is what I would consider my second act, and that is I had a career in the pharmaceutical industry for many years before I was published and before I launched into writing as robustly as I am now.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. My Big Heart-Shaped Fail, the subtitle is A Tween Comedy of Errors, and it definitely is. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yeah, I actually love that tagline because it does sum it up so well. It's a tween comedy of errors that chronicles the most cringe-worthy day of Abby Gray's life. That's really the story in a nutshell. It is reminiscent of A Midsummer Night's Dream, wherein there are lots of mixed up messages that cause all sorts of hilarious confusion.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to high school or middle school, and I definitely don't want to go back to the cringeworthy aspects of it.
Yeah.
What was your inspiration for this particular story?
It really was that Midsummer Night's Dream mixed up message concept. I wanted to find a way to modernize that and make it funny with a character that, that tweens can relate to, although adults that I've spoken to that have read the book also find the character very relatable because I know I can remember those cringeworthy days of middle school. And it feels like middle school is the time where you have the most of them. So that was really the impetus for the story, was to try to make something really funny, but also really heartfelt.
Yeah, and there are those cringe-worthy moments, but it's also a story of friendship because Abby starts the story. She's not gotten to spend winter break with her 2 best friends, and so she's feeling outside. And I think we can all probably relate to that. Can you talk about some of those friendships and the relationships in the book and how they help shape the story?
Sure. There's heart shapes. Obviously, there's hearts. There's kind of a little bit of a romance, but really I hate to use the term love story, but the love story in this book is really between the 3 girls and their friendship triangle and how it has evolved up until now and where it's going. So as you said at the outset, Paige is feeling like she's on the outside of the trio, which she calls Paige, Jess, and Abby, because those are the 3 girls, Paige, Jess, and Abby. But it's all one word because they've always been best friends. But it feels to Abby as though it's becoming Paige and Jess and Abby. And that's her worst fear, is that she's somehow going to be separated away from the trio, or not in the trio to the extent that she was. And what she doesn't know is a lot of this is in her head. And that's why she does a lot of the funny things that are in the book and that get her in the mess in the first place, was because of this perception that she had. But Paige, Jess, and Abby are friends that are very different. Maybe they weren't always so different, but now in 8th grade, they've evolved such that Abby has become very STEM, math, and academic focused. Paige is the social butterfly who is in every club and she bakes for everyone. She's very popular, has lots of friends, and Jess is still quite superficial in her friendships, and she's a little more of a gossip, and she's really getting more into boys.
And 8th grade, 7th, 8th, 9th grades, those are so pivotal. I think especially, adolescence and puberty and all those things that are changing anyway. But I grew up in a very small town, I graduated with most of the people I went to kindergarten with. And I can remember that time period where suddenly the friends that you had forever, things started to shift. They started to change. So even, for the parents that might read this book with their children, I think they're going to recognize a lot of those situations.
Yeah, I agree. And 8th grade is almost always where I put my main character and set my books in, because it's that very pivotal and transformational time in tweens' lives, and it leads to lots of interesting conflict. So I do think it's a very critical time in growth.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now that you've had a chance to hear a little bit more about Cindy and the book, we're going to take our first break for this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Abby's character. And I've told you a little bit about why I liked her at the beginning of this episode, but Cindy will talk about why she thinks she's a character that will resonate with readers. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Cindy Callaghan. We are talking about her middle grade book, My Big Heart-Shaped Fail. Let's get back to that interview. You mentioned Abby's character shifting a little more towards STEM and her interests in those areas. Can you talk a little bit more about her as the main character and what's going to resonate for readers?
Yeah, I think what resonates the most is that she's so utterly relatable, whether you're STEM or mathy or not. I think most people will see a lot of themselves in Abby, in that they're overthinking maybe a comment or an event. And then when they like Abby because they can relate to her so much, then all the bad stuff that happens to her, you could actually feel and internalize as the reader. So I tried to make Abby very, very likable, very relatable. And then it's terrible that I had fun with it. I just tried to make everything go wrong. And once I made things go wrong, I thought, how can I make it even worse? And yeah, I feel guilty about what I did to poor Abby, but I think that's what makes the book so intriguing and relatable is that people can see themselves in Abby.
It always cracks me up how mean authors are sometimes.
Yeah.
They have their character, but you can't move a story forward without conflict. Just sometimes hearing about authors being like, and then I made horrible things happen.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah,
Yes.
there is a little bit of guilt associated with that, but it's all for the purpose of making a really rich plot.
Yes. There are other characters. Obviously, you've talked a little bit about Paige and Jess, the best friends, but there's a whole cast of secondary characters. Some have more story time than others. Can you talk about the character and I'm blanking on her name, I apologize, but she has the affinity with dogs. Can you talk a little bit about her?
So her name is Nikki White, but everyone calls her Shadow.
Okay, Shadow. I
Not,
was thinking Shade, and I
yes.
knew that wasn't right. Thank you.
Not because they're mocking her by calling her Shadow, but because she has chosen to call herself as Shadow. And she is outlandish, oddballish, because she's choosing to make that her brand. So she keeps invisible pugs in her pockets and she talks to them throughout the day. She certainly is a very funny character and was the funnest to write. But there's also a very serious element to her, in that is the student who is outcast choosing to do so, or are the other students imposing it upon them? And why and how are those two decisions made? And that's another one of the romances, if you will, in the book, is how Abby and Shadow actually get to really know each other, relate to each other, and then, spoiler alert, become friends.
Right. Yeah. And it's nice to see those relationships evolve past that. It's not toxic. It's just when you're in community, those stereotypes get set early. And even Abby talks a little bit about that, just how, the kid that picks his nose or whatever in kindergarten, that follows him throughout. So it's fun to see those relationships evolve throughout this story and not just stay stagnant.
Yeah, I love to actually take stereotypes and turn them around. And so I took the stereotype of the outcast and made it such that she's chosen to be that way. And I don't think that that's an angle that has been seen before. And some of the other characters too. I tried to make them very multidimensional so that their label isn't true to who they are.
In terms of characters, do you have a really good idea of each character when you start writing a story, or do those characters evolve? Maybe even new characters kind of present themselves? How does that work for you?
Yeah, probably all of the above. In general, I do have a decent idea. I outline a lot. And that definitely helps me have a map from beginning to end. But one of the pleasures that I find in writing is that as I'm following that map, lots of other unexpected things emerge, including new characters, and or character traits. This is particularly happens in dialogue. I love writing witty banter, and I think this book is probably some of the best dialogue I've written to date. And it's that witty banter between the characters. And as I make their voices more distinct, it helps me learn more about them as people. And then as I learn more about them as people, it makes me fine tune their dialogue. And it's kind of a circle that happens. So in general, I have an idea of who the characters are, but that becomes much, much more in-depth and richer as the story goes on.
Do you have people in your life of this age that you can talk to on a fairly regular basis? I mean, I remember myself at this age, but I'm very different than, say, my nieces. So do you have people that you talk to about things that happen in this at this age?
I do. And my kids are now older than this. But school visits is one of the best ways that I do my market research, because I watch really carefully. And even though I have my characters set in 8th grade, I know my readership is going to be 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. So it's a matter of studying that whole spectrum. So what is it that 4th graders really look at and admire in the students that are older than them? But school visits is a great way for me to do my primary market research, because I listen really carefully when they think I'm just, going through my computer bag. And and I pick up terminology and their reactions to certain things. And sometimes I have opportunities to go into classrooms as well and either do workshops or volunteer, shelf books in the school library, things like that. That gives me a lot of exposure. I also have nieces who and nephews who are not this age anymore, but they're still quite a bit younger, and I can either ask them or get their opinions on lingo or how a conversation might go, or would this be cringeworthy? And they give me lots of great feedback.
Which is great because it gives you those voices and some of the terms that we probably don't use in our regular life at our age.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Words. I still have to ask my nieces, okay, I just heard this word. What does it mean in your context?
Right. Mm-hmm. For sure.
So you're able to do some research in that regard. Do you do particular types of research, or do you just kind of go with your own knowledge? What about this book? Did you do any particular research?
Yeah, most specifically for this book is I had to research balloons. And the biggest question I had was, how would I get biodegradable balloons? Because I didn't want the idea of letting balloons float up into the atmosphere be something that would be harmful to the environment. So I called local party stores to talk to them about balloons. And it turns out that our biggest store in town, the only balloons they sell are biodegradable. And then I wanted to understand what kind of float time do they have, and how does temperature affect that float time? So I was really lucky that a party store near me was able to give me a lot of that information. But I think that was probably all of the research I did for this, maybe some trajectories. My husband's an engineer, so I did ask him a couple questions about, well, if it's floating, if it's moving this, if the wind speed is this and it's going in this direction, how long will it take for a balloon carrying something that weighs this much to travel? So my husband was able to help me make some of those calculations.
Actually, that was one of the parts that I really appreciated in the book. It's just a tiny little part where it talks about you talk about biodegradable balloons. Geez, I can't talk. I'm sorry. Yeah. And Abby just mentions it kind of as a throwaway comment, but I was like, I appreciate that so much because you're letting them go, and you read so many stories about how dangerous to the environment just letting balloons go can be.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually really happy to hear that the majority of balloons sold are biodegradable, which is great. But it also helped me a lot with the story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Let's go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, Cindy will be talking about what it is about this age group that makes her enjoy writing for and about them. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Cindy Callaghan. Let's return to that interview. What draws you, do you think, to writing for and about this age group?
So it's a very interesting question because I sort of fell into this age category by accident. The first book I had written, I love thrillers. I love suspense thrillers. That's what I read most of the time myself for enjoyment. And I was working on a legal thriller that backdropped the pharmaceutical industry, which is where I worked. And I wrote this book for a very long time. It went out in submission to publishers. I didn't get any offers on it. I was working on revising it. And then I happened to be watching my daughter, who at the time was 11, and she and her pals were cooking in my kitchen, and they were baking. And they were having so much fun. And I thought, boy, it would be really great if I could put together a cooking club for these girls. And I know the boys in their classes also really like cooking. And then I thought more about, well, what if it was a secret cooking club? Why would the club be secret? What are they doing that's so secretive? And that was the genesis for creating Kelly Quinn's Secret Cooking Club, which is a book I wrote that was published under the title Just Add Magic. And that was my first book that was published, and it was middle grade. And once I had my foot in the door in that category, I started developing relationships with my editor, among other people, and decided to take advantage of that and work on another middle grade book, and then another and another. So that's really how I fell into it. And what I've heard from people is my voice, my natural writing voice, really lends itself to middle grade. So I kind of got there by accident, and once I fell in the hole, it just grew.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Are you working on something new currently?
I'm working on a lot currently, and I always work on a lot. I always have a very robust, like, front burner, back burner type system going on. And I thought you might ask me this question, and as I was thinking about it, like today alone, I'll use the word touched. Like, I touched 3 different book projects. One is a book that's already published, but I'm working on a promotional effort for it. One book I'm revising, and another book I printed out the most current pages of it because it's written, I think it's done, and I want to take a whole nother fresh pass at it because it's been a little while. This afternoon, I'll go to the library. I have 20 picture books on hold, and I plan on sitting there for 2 hours and reading and rereading these picture books because I'm working on several picture books, and I want to really understand what the newest picture book publications look like, what their themes are, what does the art look like, what's on trend right now. And then I'll probably work on one or more of those picture books later in the week. So that just gives you a couple of ideas of projects that I work on within a given week. One of them is middle grade, one is YA, and then I said, like, the picture books. I also work on movie pitches all the time. I just scheduled a pitch session for next week, so I'll rehearse what I plan on pitching to that producer, and that'll be probably 2 different projects. So there's 2 more projects that I'll, quote unquote, touch this week. But I always have a lot of different projects moving at the same time.
Well, from my perspective, being able to go and just read picture books, but it's work. And so it's, you're not just doing it because you're sitting there reading picture books. Sounds like a delightful way to spend an afternoon. But with so many projects going on concurrently, do you have a way of keeping track of them all, or does your brain just keep them in order?
Well, I often have a map of like this summer, I made a map of what I wanted to accomplish by the end of the summer. And I do that each month too, what I think my goals are for this particular month. So that's a way of helping me prioritize. I know it sounds like saying that I touched multiple projects within a given week, but it does help me prioritize which ones I'm going to actively work on, because there are another dozen that are on the back burner for now. And they're either drafted or it might be an idea that I want to flesh out. It might be something old that's been in my trunk for a while that I feel like I want to dust off and look at it again because it didn't sell. But those are on the back burner for now. And then maybe after the summer or in the new year, they'll kind of get their turn. But no, I like to always not always. I like to try to have fresh eyes when I'm looking on something. And if I work on any one given thing too much, it's like I can memorize it and then I can't look at it critically. So I like letting things rest, like, to marinate and picking up something else for a while. And then when I pick up the old thing a week or 2 weeks or even just a couple days later, I might see things that I would have otherwise overlooked. But I am able to pretty well keep track of them.
You mentioned your first book, the book with the cooking club. Are there any other books or writings that you want to highlight during our time together?
I would encourage anyone who likes my books to look at my previous books, the Lost In series, which are 5 novels, middle grade novels, in which a different gang, so it's not a series that you have to read one after the other. Each one is a standalone. They're just co-branded. But in each one, a gang has an adventure in a different city. There is Hollywood, Paris, Rome, London, and Ireland. I think that was all 5. And they sell really well. A couple of them have won awards. And if you're looking for something for the holidays, The Girl Who Ruined Christmas, which is my tween holiday adventure, is a great, quick read around the holidays. And all of my books are certainly great for voracious readers, but I try to make them very fast-paced, funny page turners, using a lot of the elements of thrillers, which is a category I love reading so much. I've implemented in my middle grade books to keep the pages turning. That is very appealing for reluctant readers. And I really like that I'm focusing on that particular area of reader because I was a reluctant reader myself, and I found a lot of novels overwhelming or daunting, slow, overly descriptive, and not really designed for my pure reading pleasure. And that's really what I've gone into that with that in mind as I write.
Yeah, that sounds great because it is hard when reading might be a challenge to get bogged down in some of those details.
Yep.
Yeah. The series sounds really fun. Have you been to all of the places that you write in the series? You said Ireland, London, yep. Paris.
I have, yes. And not necessarily for research writing the book, but I would have been there before or during. However, I was also just amazingly impressed at how much research I could do using Google Earth. I could actually, via satellite, zoom into the Eiffel Tower to look at precisely what the lattice pattern looks like. I'm sure I could find that also just by Googling, what does the Eiffel Tower look like? But I could use Google Earth to see it myself up close, as well as the cobblestone streets in some areas of Rome. So even though I had been there were certain details that I perhaps couldn't recall. So I was able to use other tools to research that.
It really is amazing the amount you can do with internet research nowadays.
It is. It's almost a little spooky too, but yes.
Yeah, it's very convenient though.
Yep.
It is time for our final break of this podcast, but yes, I will just say that technology especially everything has its pros and its cons, but technology, especially as fast as it's developing lately, definitely has pros and cons. So I'm glad that it enables us to do things like research and connect with people from childhood that we might not without Facebook or whatever social media platform you're on, but it's moving fast. At any rate, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, more with Cindy. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Cindy Callaghan. We mentioned your previous career in pharmaceuticals. So what drew you to then writing? Was it something you always wanted to do? What prompted you to decide to write for publication?
So I've been writing forever. I wrote my first big project, if you want to call it big, in third grade. With the help of my father, I wrote the sequel to the musical Grease. And my third grade music teacher helped my class put that production on. And I still have the script. And not too terribly long ago, I posted a picture of it on my Facebook page. And I was surprised how many people that I went to third grade with are follow my Facebook page and commented on it and remembered it or had been in it or knew who played what role. And that was kind of a thrill to see that there were people that remembered that. But I've always written, and despite being a reluctant reader, I've always been a writer and a lover of stories and a consumer of stories. And even though I wasn't reading them voraciously, I was listening to them on cassette tape in the car when we would take trips. I loved sitting around a campfire doing ghost stories, watched movies, watched TV, and just had lots of different ways that I consumed stories right up until I went to college. And I went to college thinking that I wanted to be a screenwriter. However, things took a little bit of a detour, and I ended up graduating with an English degree and then went on to get an MBA and an internship at a pharmaceutical company. And that's kind of how I got into pharmaceuticals. That wasn't a plan. Got into the company and loved it and did really well. And I was there for decades. About, I don't know, 3/4 of the way into my career there, I picked up writing again just as a hobby and realized how much I liked it and how serious I wanted to be about it. And I did both jobs for a long time, and then eventually separated from the company and took on writing a little bit more seriously, which I still do. And I still do, however, dabble in some pharmaceutical work as well.
Okay. From your particular path to writing, do you have advice for people you talk to who think they might want to write as well?
Yeah, I do get contacted by aspiring writers often. And the two biggest bits of advice I can give is, first of all, you have to put your butt in a chair and do it. A lot of times they'll tell me about ideas that they have, which are wonderful, or a book on writing that they read and they might have questions about. That's great too. But when it comes to answers to questions that I might ask, like, oh, how much have you written? How far along are you? Most of them say they haven't started writing. And I say it's not going to get written if you don't write it. And that seems obvious, but a lot of people are just looking, I think, for that nudge or that encouragement that they can do it. And I think all writers should be part of a writing critique group. I'm part of a couple different writing critique groups. I always have been. I don't think it's the type of thing that can be done in a vacuum, and that sharing and getting comments from others is a critical part of the writing process.
Thank you. Although I think it's very mean to say that it's not going to get written if you don't write it. That's just, that's just negative. You mentioned that you really like to read in the suspense genre. Is that your go-to genre? And who are some of your favorite authors?
It really is my go-to. So right now I am listening to a Kathy Reichs book on my audiobook. I listen to audiobooks probably about one a week, and I'm reading a Jack Reacher novel. I love Sandra Brown, Michael Crichton, Stuart Woods, John Grisham, James Patterson, Michael Connolly, so many of authors who have influenced that space, and that writing has really influenced the way I write middle grade novels.
I'm fascinated by how much James Patterson writes, and the fact that he also co-writes some middle grade books. Excuse me. Have you read some of those?
I have, yes. I try. It's really hard to keep up with all that he publishes because he does come out with books very fast.
Yes.
I think he's amazing. And I had the opportunity last October, to interview him at the Morristown, New Jersey Festival of Books. And that I will always see as a career highlight. Just such a thrill to meet someone who has influenced me so much and spend time with him and interview him.
Oh, that's really cool. Hey, wonderful. In terms of internet presence, website, if you have one, and any social media that people can find and interact with you.
Yeah, I think I'm everywhere. My website is cindycallahan.com. Callaghan has a G in it, and a lot of people miss that G because it's silent. I'm on Facebook, Cindy Callaghan Author, Instagram, Cindy Callaghan Writes. I have a YouTube page where I sometimes do post interviews for different books or feedback. Sometimes when I come back from a school visit, I'll do a quick video and book trailers. And I know a lot of school teachers and classes like to look at a book trailer before they agree to what book a class might read together. So I hope that those trailers are a useful resource for that.
All right. Thank you. Cindy, we've talked about a few things during our time together, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure we talked about or highlighted during this time?
One of the things that I know we mentioned, but I do want to highlight it, but it's the reluctant reader segment of readers. And I worry that they sometimes get dismissed. I was put in the turtle reading group at a very young age. And I know that times have changed and education has changed since the 1970s. But I think reluctant readers, just because they might find certain books challenging, doesn't mean that they don't have a very big future in reading and writing.
Yeah, it's amazing how things that happen at such a young age can kind of affect us, right? I mean, just that word turtle, which is kind of a cute word, but not the best idea, right?
Correct.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, not only about My Big Heart-Shaped Fail, but about other writings and writing in general. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. This has been a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Thank you again to Cindy for talking to me about My Big Heart-Shaped Fail. I really liked this book. It is a quick read. It is fun. It is funny. It has some great characters. Shadow, for some reason, she was my favorite in this book. Just her quirky personality and her way of dealing with being outside, as she called it, and just the pugs in her pockets made me laugh. She really committed to that bit. I know people like that in my life, and I grew up with people like that. And I probably was a little bit of that person. You know, we all have those coping mechanisms, right, that we establish to help navigate social circles. But I just really, really liked the characters in this book and the way the story moved along at such a fast, fun pace, but also resolved so many of the things, the issues that were created by Abby's sending those notes out into the universe. Not as far out as she had hoped. But if you have a middle grader or the 4th through 8th grade-ish, somewhere in there, or you have children that you like to read with, this is a very fun story and could lead to some really good, fun conversations, I think. So you should definitely check this one out. And, of course, any other of Cindy's books that catch your attention, definitely do that. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode, when I will be speaking with Brazilian author Heloisa Prieto about her book. It's also middle grade, it's more young adult, but it is called The Musician, and so I'm looking forward to sharing that conversation with you. I hope you'll join me for that episode. In the meantime, if you have not done so already, like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. Make sure you're getting new episodes when they come out. And also, leaving a review really, really helps me to get the podcast out to more listeners. So if that is something that you are inclined to do, I greatly appreciate all reviews that the podcast receives. Also, if you are on social media and want to follow the podcast, you can do so on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I say this every week, but it's true. I love hearing from listeners. Tell me what you're reading. Tell me what you want to read. Just talk to me about books or not books, whatever. Come find me on social media. We'll find the podcast on social media. You'll find me as well. Thank you so much. I hope that you are having a great day. I hope that your weekend is wonderful. And as always, I hope that you find plenty of time in your busy schedules to get lost in lots of good books. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.